initiatives that propose a new program need to also set forth their funding source. Because there was uniform agreement, I think, around the state as we conducted our series of hearings last year, that we can't continue with a situation where the legislature is so constrained in our choices around the budget because voters have enacted new programs without stating their funding source, essentially prioritizing those new programs above everything else in subsequent budgets. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Mr. Gatto.
Thank you, Mr. Fuhrer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. This measure is about, plain and simply, this measure is about fiscal responsibility. This is a time where we are asked to consider a large number of reforms, as Mr. Fuhrer noted. We are doing our best to reform several different aspects of how we conduct the business of government up here in the legislature, and I think it would be completely incomplete. Our reform efforts would be incomplete during these times if we do not consider the ballot initiative and the unfunded mandates that have been created by ballot initiative over the years. This measure is very simple. It just requires that if a ballot initiative is proposed before the voters, it has to identify how it's going to pay for any new program that it seeks to implement. It would require that two nonpartisan sources, the Department of Finance and the Legislative Analyst's Office, both agree that there is adequate funding to pay for this new program. It would also set a floor at $5 million so that small programs that are not something that really costs a great amount to the state would be exempt from this. This would, I think, impose a sense of discipline that so many of us have asked for so many times on the floor, where nobody likes unfunded mandates. People hate unfunded mandates at the local level. People hate unfunded mandates created by us, and people hate unfunded mandates created by the electorate. This measure would simply put in the Constitution the requirement that there is no more such thing as an unfunded mandate put in place by a ballot initiative that puts in place a program without identifying how it's going to pay for it. I'm not sure if we're going to establish quorum, so I was going to.
Okay. Well, if you want me to, I'll establish quorum.
Sure.
Thank you.
I saw some.
Madam Secretary, please call roll.
Fong.
Here.
Logue.
No.
Wow.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I just want to
give up.
I just want to see if you were going to bite. I was just testing you guys.
Jeez.
Can I say aye?
I think here is.
I'd rather say aye so I can prove you wrong.
Bonilla. Hall. Mendoza. Swanson. Valadeo.
Here.
Yep.
4-0, we have a quorum. Please.
Thank you. I was just about to notice how Mr. Logue missed my great presentation, and Mr. Fuhrer's as well. But
Okay, I'll second the bill as amended.
thank you. So I'm happy to answer any questions, and we respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Yeah. Actually, let me just tack on one thing. There's been one criticism raised of the bill by the opponent, which is that the bill puts the proponent of an initiative in a tough spot because the proponent could find out midway through the process that the initiative costs money and they haven't taken into account how to deal with that. The analysis points out an easy way around that critique, and the analysis is well taken in this point because current law allows the proponents to go to the Secretary of State to essentially get an early advisory opinion about many facets of the bill, including its cost. And I think what this bill would do, combined with the point raised in the analysis, is to promote best behavior on the part of proponents of ballot measures by getting early information available to themselves and the public about what initiatives will cost and how to pay for it. And so, again, joining my colleague, Mr. Gatto, teaming up on a bill and urging an aye vote.
Okay. Any witnesses in support? Witnesses in opposition to this bill?
Besides Dan Logue.
We're actually going to trade him the no from before for a here on the bill when the bill is issued.
I might do both.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, members, good afternoon. David Wolf here with the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. We are opposed to the bill. And we're opposed to the bill for many reasons. First and foremost and primarily because it would absolutely eviscerate, in our view, any role of ever qualifying taxpayer-friendly measures for the ballot. And not just taxpayer-friendly measures, but a lot of law enforcement initiatives as well. Let me just run down the list. Prop 13 comes to mind. Okay, we're not going to backfill $6 or $7 billion worth of local property tax revenue with tax increases in order to fund that measure. Prop 218 comes to mind, another Jarvis-sponsored initiative. Proposition 26 passed last year. Jessica's Law, Marcy's Law, 3 strikes, and potentially even redistricting as well. May fall under that $5 million cost threshold now. Simply put, members, as I've testified before on previous iterations of this bill, it is the role and responsibility of the legislature to do the will of the people. Members, you can say your hands are tied by this process, and indeed there is a number floating around right now that says 80% of the budget is tied up in these initiatives. 80% of the general fund is tied up in these initiatives. It's a number that's commonly bantied about. But it's not true. It's not true. If you want to, you can suspend Prop 98. You can suspend some aspects of transportation funding. Whether or not you want to is ultimately your call and not ours. But the point is, you have the ability right now to balance your budget and live within your means, and it is the role and responsibility of this body to respond to the will of the voters when they pass these initiatives. And we believe direct democracy and that role should be maintained. And to the extent that this would eliminate the ability to do things, for instance, like pass a spending cap, and do things to ensure that Californians and individuals live within their means, we're opposed to this bill. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I'm Lou Euler, President of the National Tax Limitation Committee. While we have national in the name, why we keep our headquarters right here in the capital area in Roseville and are very active and have been for years in the initiative process. This, we continually, it appears, have to fight rearguard actions to protect the viability of the initiative process that is so essential to, and as a matter of fact, few of you would be here today, but for the use of the initiative process by our committee and others in 1990, Prop 140, which provided for term limits so that we would open up offices for a broader range of men and women throughout California to serve. And presumably, had this measure been in effect, why there would have been an estimate of a cost, and we may not have been able to put that measure on. What I'm fearful of is there's no definitions here as to what a cost is. A cost, I assume, could be a cost to the state and local governments if we had a tax cut measure that went on the ballot. Furthermore, there is no time frame spelled out during which the appointed officials who would make the calculation of the cost are to perform their administrative function. There is no effort here to integrate the process that one must follow under the gathering of the preparation of a measure, its submission for title and summary, and the gathering of signatures. When in that process would the cost estimate be made? Would it be that somebody prepares an initiative measure and submits it to the appropriate officials, and that is a function that must precede the submission of this measure for title and summary to the Attorney General's office? clearly, if it is subsequent to that, one could be in the midst of the tight time frame of 150 days to gather the signatures and be knocked out of the box by an adverse determination that, in fact, there was cost that was unaccounted for. So the range of questions that is raised by this without any clarity for answers is such as to essentially shut down the initiative process for all intents and purposes. And so we feel that this is truly an affront to the initiative process and to the people's right to change government through the action and power of the people. Certainly, if the authors gave this more thought and put a time schedule in and laid out definitions of costs, and so we could argue intelligently about what that means, then it might be something that we can continue with. But as presented, why that it would be a dereliction on the part of any member of the legislature to vote affirmatively for this measure, in our judgment.
Good afternoon, members. My name is Paulo Cibaja. I'm the Legislative Director with Capital Resource Institute, and we're here to speak in opposition of ACA 6. On October 10th, 1911, by a way of special election, the initiative process was established here in California with 77% of Californians voting in favor. Very much like politics, estimating costs for projects, measures, and initiatives is fluid. The numbers game changes constantly and is not static in nature. The author contends the initiative process shackles the hands of legislatures in dealing with the budget. He also contends that voters enact measures without any way to pay for them. I would submit kindly and respectfully that instead of blaming the people of California for its budget woes, that the members of this body submit themselves to a bit of introspection, because more often than not, this very body passes legislation without any way to pay for them. ACA 6 subverts the initiative process by making it difficult for the people to submit any initiative, specifically initiatives relating to tax reductions. If the people wish to reduce California's state and local tax burden, which is actually above the national average, currently at 11.8, they wouldn't be able to do so. If they wish to alter the top individual income tax rate, which is the third highest in the nation, they wouldn't be able to do so. And I may add that very same tax rate also applies to small businesses in California, which makes it California one of the most burdensome states in the nation for businesses to thrive. Or if they wish to alter California's sales tax rate, which is the highest in the nation, currently at 8.25 with the additional levy of local government, 1.5 tax rate, they would not be able to do so. The people of California have in recent history taken to the polls in order to correct Sacramento's prolific taxation, desire to alter long-standing practices, and enact legislation not favored by the populace. By passing ACA 6, this body has all but eliminated the people's ability to check the legislature, essentially snubbing voters, their intent, and intelligence. For those reasons, we ask for a no vote. Thank you.
Witnesses in opposition?
Rob Gutierrez with the California Taxpayers Association. We also oppose. Thanks.
All right. Questions from members? Okay. Dan?
Mr. Gatto, it's good to see you again.
Good to see you, Mr. Logue.
I want you to know I think you're an excellent legislator.
Thank you.
Welcome. I have a question here is that, because I know that you want everybody to play by the same rules, so I'm sure that you're going to also amend your bill in order to make sure the legislature is included in this?
I do not have plans to amend this bill right now, although I'm happy to see you, willing to propose something similar like this next year, and I'd be happy to work with you on it.
Could you do it this year?
I think we're past the bill introduction deadline. I could be mistaken, but
I can amend it, though, couldn't I?
you can amend this bill. I suppose if the committee is willing to take the amendment, but and the author as well. But
I mean, and I think that
one thing at a time. I prefer to not bite off more than I can chew. We see this. A very strong and I think somewhat misguided opposition today, and so I want to be careful that we don't bite off more than we can chew and have more misconceptions going around about the measure.
My concern is, and I appreciate your answer there. My concern is that what's going to happen here is today we're going to walk out of this building and type up a press release that says bill that basically passed Prop 26, Prop 13, Jessica's Law, Three Strikes Law, is going to make sure this never happens again. It's going to make it more difficult for this to happen. And my concern is this is, and I know that this is not your intent, but this is going to be perceived as an all-out assault on grassroots participation, and that we are going to control the governmental process and put our hands around the throat of the people who basically want to introduce legislation on their own, because we have, in my opinion, are going to ban them from being able to move in that process. So I think that when I talk about Jessica's Law, I'm going to have to go to the public and say, if it came back, it would be a lot more difficult to achieve this with this type of legislation. And the second thing is that if it's good enough for the public, why isn't it good enough for the legislature? That's all. That's what I don't understand.
Sure. Well, I'm happy that you brought up those points. I was a little, well, certainly curious and fascinated to see such terrific groups as the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Organization and Lou Euler here today to speak against a measure that requires fiscal responsibility. It's also interesting to hear my colleagues who like to remind us that we have a Republican form of government to speak in favor of what some people call democracy run amok. This measure is really simple. It requires any new program, not a tax cut, folks, any new program proposed to first identify how it will pay for that program. It does not affect Prop 13. I want to say that again. It does not affect Prop 13. I'll say it a third time. It does not affect Prop 13.
Does it affect bonds?
Pardon me?
Does it affect bonds?
It does not affect bonds. I want to clear up another myth. This would not affect things like redistricting. We put a threshold in here, a dollar threshold. That's why we put the $5 million threshold. Redistricting was scored at $3 million, so it would not affect redistricting. Three strikes was a good policy, but it was irresponsible fiscally. I mean, nobody in their right mind, legislator or no responsible person, I think, during these times would consider putting forth a new program that costs billions and billions and billions of dollars without first identifying how we're going to try to pay for it, especially during this time of crisis. And I would submit that we should not do that during times of plenty. So, another example, you had Prop 17, which was the so-called Habitat Conservation Fund. I mean, this again, an important measure, an important program. I think all these programs are important. But this costs hundreds of millions of dollars. And we can't just continually pass things that we don't have the means to pay for. And I think every time I say that, I pinch myself and I say, gee, I sound like Dan Logue. I sound like Heather Howard Jarvis. I sound like you, Euler. And that's why I'm fascinated to see these folks here fighting this. This measure has two Republican co-authors. It's similar to a measure put forth by Sam Blakesley in 2009. He talked about the will of the people. Every poll has said that this is the most popular reform that the people want. 76% of the population of the state of California wants this reform to occur. I'm happy to work with any group, any side of the aisle, even these gentlemen here. Today it was the first that I've heard of them on this measure, even though 6 major newspapers editorialized in favor of this in December of last year. 6. In parts of the state that are traditionally considered red and parts of the state that are traditionally considered blue. Things as diverse as the Sacramento Bee and the Merced Sun-Star. Yet this is the first that I've heard of this opposition. So I think, just to answer some of these questions, we all have responsibility for our budget woes. Everybody's got to take their responsibility for them. Yeah. This is an important measure. It takes a step to stop some of those budget woes.
And I really appreciate your response, because I think that you make very good points, and I think that they're very credible. And I agree with just about almost everything that you just said. If the legislator played by the same rules, I'd be on board, because the debt that we've incurred hasn't been primarily from propositions, but it's been from propositions that this House has passed, and the water bonds and the bonds that this House has passed. So the massive amount of debt that we have isn't because of grassroots. It's because we haven't been able to reel in our own house. And I'm wondering if you would include that as an amendment, then I would definitely take a look at it.
I kind of view that as saying that, ice cream is good, but I'm not going to eat this ice cream because it doesn't have cookies on it as well. I'm happy, like I said, I'm happy to work with you for other legislation. This is the way that we've designed to craft this bill this year. We're hoping it passes this initial test. It's an important test of bipartisanship, an important test of people and see what they mean when they talk about being fiscally responsible. It's ice cream. I don't have the sprinkles and the cookies yet, but I'm happy to work with you on the sprinkles and the cookies.
And I appreciate that, sir.
I was going to say, let me add just a couple quick things. First, when we conducted the hearings around the state last year on reform, in terms of grassroots voice, the perhaps, if not the most pervasive grassroots voice, certainly among the most frequently said comments by members of the public was, we need to deal with the initiative process in this respect, not by inhibiting it, but by making sure that voters are fully apprised of the consequences of what's before them. Because one invoked the idea of what the progressive era and the beginning of the initiative process. I think we can all agree that the initiative process was first proposed as an antidote to the concentration of power in Sacramento, mostly by oil and railroads here. Mm-hmm. That process has been turned on its head. And as a consequence of that, major interests outside of state interests frequently through money rather than the power of ideas have taken over this process. This is a means of giving voters as much information as possible before they make an informed decision. And when it comes to what would be necessary to comply with the letter of this amendment, one doesn't need necessarily to raise taxes to do so. One has to identify a program that is deemed of less value. That could be also a way of showing how the dollars even out. Yeah. And so the bill, it was characterized as a way to increase taxes. It's not that at all. It's a way to present voters with a hard choice and to choose among priorities at a time when we can't have everything we want.
And I appreciate your answer because, and I think the credibility level would be greatly increased if we did a same poll on applying the same strategy with the legislature as we're doing with the grassroots. And my other issue is if you would include bonds into this and not play favorites, I think this thing would really take off. And I would like to see you amend the bill whether you would consider doing that. Thank you.
Any other questions from members?
Yeah, I made the motion.
And I second it.
Okay.
Sorry. All right. I want to thank both authors for working together and with our committee staff on this very important issue. I agree that many times people vote on initiative measures without completely understanding the impact that the vote will have on the state's budget, and so I thank you for bringing this up. However, I agree that the initiative process should be easy for the average person to navigate and should not be burdensome and too complicated that it inhibits participation. If ACA 7 were to pass, there would need to be follow-up legislation in order to implement it. Some of the suggestions that were mentioned in our analysis, like make sure that the proponents receive the resources they need to plan for an initiative, ensuring that there's a relevant appeals process in place for a proponent to contest the estimated fiscal cost of an initiative measure, and allowing for proper notification when an initiative has been determined to have a fiscal impact exceeding $5 million. But the committee analysis highlights some of these issues, and I'm confident both authors will take these items into consideration in the future to ensure that this prohibition does not inhibit participation in the initiative process. For these reasons, I am supporting this measure. Okay. Would you like to close?
I'll just respectfully ask for aye vote and respectfully ask those who have spoken up in favor of fiscal responsibility to vote fiscal responsibility today. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Fong?
Aye.
Fong, aye. Logue? Logue, no. Bonilla? Aye. Bonilla, aye. Hall?
All aye.
Hall, aye. Mendoza?
Aye.
Mendoza, aye. Swanson?
Swanson, aye.
Swanson, aye. Valadeo? No. Valadeo, no.
5-2
Thank
is
you
out.
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Oh, I know, but I wasn't clear if you're going to let me do it now or let Mr. Allen. Okay, thank you.
Okay. ACA 11.
Okay, ACA 11. I hope that this one will be another interesting vote because we often hear in our society that the federal Constitution is sacred. We hear this from lots of people, that the federal Constitution is a sacred document. Well, the federal Constitution is a difficult document to amend. The state Constitution, however, is a very, very easy document to amend. Mr. Chairman, permission to use a prop?
Sure.
Okay, so the federal Constitution is this big. Okay? The state Constitution is this big. The federal Constitution has been amended 27 times, 17 if you count the ones past the Bill of Rights, 220-something years. The state Constitution, however, has been amended 541 times in 161 years. This measure would, my next ACA that I present to you, would simply require that we have a higher threshold for the electorate to amend the Constitution. I want to be very clear because I think there's a lot of misconceptions about this one as well. First of all, I'm not a big fan of supermajorities. However, a supermajority to amend the Constitution, absolutely. It's too often that people put junk or hateful measures in the Constitution of the state of California. In terms of preserving other methods, this would still preserve the method for the legislature to amend the Constitution by a 2/3 vote and then put on by a simple majority ratification by the population. So there would be two routes for someone to amend the Constitution in this state. Assuming ACA 11 passes, however, gone would be the days where special interests are free to use and abuse the California Constitution by throwing all kinds of things in it that have more of a place in a statute. I want to make a point about this that I think is really worth mentioning. Here we have a book called California Crack-Up, How Reform Broke the Golden State and How We Can Fix It. This is a book that talks about how important it is for us to amend the initiative process. Very timely, and I promise I did not put anybody up to this, just a couple weeks ago, The Economist, which has a very, very different perspective from the authors of California Crack-Up necessarily, when I'm talking about political philosophy, did a cover story and a 16-page report, single-spaced, on how this reform is the single most important one for the future of the state of California. So ACA 11 is very simple. It simply makes it, requires a 2/3 vote to amend the California Constitution. When a ballot initiative that would amend the California Constitution is initiated by the electorate. Just want to compare real quick some of our other states. Anybody on the board know how, well, and the consultants can't answer this, how many states in the union allow ballot initiatives, period? It's just 22. How many of them allow us to amend the Constitution by a vote of the people? It's just 17.
Mr. Chairman, with the bill.
I'll just use a couple minutes to finish making a couple points, if that's all right. Just by a survey, Arizona requires 15% of signatures of the last gubernatorial election just for a constitutional measure to go on the ballot. Mississippi requires 12% signatures, and the vote has to amend the Constitution in Mississippi. You have to have an even vote across the counties of the state. Florida, supermajority threshold to amend the Constitution by electorate. Montana, Nevada, Nebraska, they have a higher threshold that's nearly double what California's is. So we toyed with the idea of changing the signature threshold to amend the Constitution, but then we got feedback from a lot of good government types, and they told us that that type of amendment would simply take a process that is dominated by wealthy special interests, make it a process that's dominated by uber wealthy special interests. So wanting to keep the grassroots involved and wanting to make sure that we had things that would still allow them to get things to the ballot, we decided to go down this route. I think it's a very, very good measure. It preserves what I think should be a sacred document in this state, and I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Okay. Any witnesses in support? Witnesses in opposition?
Mr. Chairman, members, David Wolf here again with the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, and we're going 2 for 2. We're opposed to this one, too. And just to make the point, members, this is what I like to call the have your cake and eat it too measure. Any new constitutional amendments require a 2/3 vote to be approved. Any previously approved constitutional amendments can be amended by a majority vote. Prop 13 technically could be amended by a majority vote. Prop 8 could be technically amended by a majority vote. The author referred to keeping junk measures out of the Constitution. I would ask members, was Prop 98 a junk measure? If this bill were to be approved, Prop 98 would now have to be approved by a 2/3 vote. And not just Prop 98, but again, Prop 218, Prop 26, Prop 11, Prop 14, the open primary measure, Prop 187 dealing with immigration, and Prop 8, again, dealing with gay marriage. None of these measures, when they were approved, hit a 2/3 vote threshold. We're not just talking about tax measures here, members. We're talking about issues to fund education and fund priorities that members of both sides of this aisle deem incredibly important. members, I would think very carefully before you leap at this one, and I'd ask for a no vote. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Paulo Sabaha again with Capital Resource Institute, and we too are opposed to this bill. Currently, it takes, I believe, 5% of the population from the previous gubernatorial election in order to qualify an initiative. But in order to qualify a constitutional amendment, it takes 8%. So the threshold is much higher on the front end in order to qualify an initiative to be a constitutional amendment for consideration by the voters of the state of California. Further, your very own analysis states that of the 61 measures introduced in the last decade, 33 were proposed amendments, and only 27% of those 33 were actually approved into the California state constitution. I would submit that the reason why that constitution, as the author pointed out, is so large is not because of the people of California who've decided to take their government back via the initiative process, and in some cases the constitutional amendments, but because of legislation proposed in this very body over the decades and legislation approved by this body that has actually made that constitution, the state constitution, much larger than it really should be. It isn't because of the people of the state of California. It's because of the members that serve in this legislature, members who've served before. So for those reasons, obviously this, by requiring a 2/3 threshold, you'll be depriving a lot of people who believe their vote was final in enshrining certain language into the state constitution and throw it all into a mix. I would like for you to think about that and really consider that the people of California have had a say on a lot of these issues, and approving something like this when it's already difficult to qualify a constitutional amendment on the front end would just make it that much more difficult for the people to have their say. So for those reasons, we ask you to vote no.
Thank you. All right. Members? Sandra Swanson.
Yeah, let me say I have nothing but respect for the author and what you're attempting to do here. I have a great deal of respect for the people in the state of California and our democracy. And I think that, and I have a lot of confidence in that democracy. And initiative measures that make it more difficult for a simple majority of the people of California's will to be put into law through the initiative process. You know, I have problems with that. I think that my experience with the 2/3 supermajorities have been more or less tyranny of the minority. They certainly haven't worked too well in this institution, and I think that there may be enough votes for this to move out of this committee today, but I really think that that the principle of 50% plus one works in all of our elections here, and I think if I think about the question of people being able to marry who they want, if the people of California want to put that initiative again on the ballot or address it, I think that it should have an opportunity to be heard and passed that way. I had no problem with the previous initiative in terms of us trying to pay as we go, but I just think that it's a very I'm not quite sure all the unintended consequences associated with trying to raise the threshold of when the people can, through petition, be heard through the electoral process. And so I'm going to have to not support you today on this, and those are the reasons. I just think that the people's right, to me, seems to they should keep that right to be able to petition their government and pass an initiative with a simple majority of the vote. I think that speaks to our democracy.
Okay. Assemblymember Logue.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Gatto, for your presentation. I guess the real issue is this same principle going to apply to the legislature?
I don't understand the question.
Well, the constitutional, if we pass a constitutional amendment is it going to be required 2/3 majority vote if the legislature passes it, or if it's
Yes.
when the people vote? Excuse me, when the people vote on it. If the legislature,
Yes.
Okay, so both it'll be simple majority or 2/3.
Yeah, maybe I can use this opportunity. I think I can switch your vote because I want to give it an opportunity to address that, and I also want to address Mr. Logue and also some of the things said. So, well, I know. Well, just hear me out. Hear me out, because maybe I didn't come talk to you beforehand. Maybe I should have. So, first of all,
it's a good way of dealing with Bill.
It is an honor to have the Howard Jarvis Association here talking so poorly and decrying the 2/3 threshold. I'm happy to have you on record saying that a simple majority vote is the way to govern our state. I hope you take the same approach with taxes in the future that you've taken with this measure, and it's really great to hear you saying how detrimental 2/3 is and how important it is that the simple majority rule. I feel the same way. I really do. However, this is amending the Constitution. This is not affecting statutes. This is not affecting statutes put on the ballot by the people. They still have the simple majority vote there. This is to amend the Constitution. We are the only state in the United States of America and the only country in the world that allows such an easy measure easy method to change our very governing document. This would only affect amendments to the Constitution, not statutes proposed by initiative, and there's a big difference. This would also not affect amendments. So when we hear our friend over here saying that this would allow people to amend all this stuff by a simple majority, that's not true. The only place where the simple majority would be proposed to stay in place when an initiative is proposed by the people is for a straight repeal. So if someone wants to repeal Prop 8, majority vote. Same rules in place at the time of passage. We walked a very fine line on this. We wanted to make sure that we thought out all the unintended consequences. So the rules are still in place that were at the time of the passage, and at the time of passage it was simple majority. So we thought about that. We also tried to address it as much as possible. We met with every group on that issue. Talking about Prop 98 and some other things.
Sorry, I was just asking a question. Do you mind if I follow up on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. On the analysis that was given from Mr. Fong's staff, here's the response. The initiative constitutional amendment only. The provisions of this constitutional amendment would apply only to constitutional amendments that are proposed through the initiative process. Constitutional amendments that are proposed by the legislature would not be affected by this measure.
Correct. So I thought you were asking if we were going to hold the legislature to the same thing that we hold the people to, because you're in favor of that, right? Okay, well, the legislature already has a 2/3 requirement on us. So we should put that on the people then too, right? Because we want to hold them to the same standard. You see, we have to, for us to even put something on the ballot, we have to pass it by 2/3 if it's a constitutional amendment, for us to even put it on the ballot. And yet the population can pass a constitutional amendment by a 50% plus one vote. So what this would do, and by the way, in the federal government, it's a 75% vote, right? So this would establish parity between the people and the legislature, and that path would still be open. So if someone has an idea and they really desperately want to get it on the ballot and let it pass by a simple majority vote, they can still do it with this measure. They just have to come to their duly elected representatives, which is us, folks, which is us, and let us have thorough hearings, let us vet it. It would still have to pass through us by a 2/3 vote. That's the rule. That's the rule we've always lived by. Then it could go to the people as a simple majority. This only applies to the narrow situations where the people propose a constitutional amendment by themselves and go directly to the ballot box. It does not apply to statutes. It does not apply if they go through us first.
Isidore Hall? Okay. Sandra Swanson.
Actually, many of those arguments that you just made really stiffens my resolve, because I believe that we should be able to pass revenue requests with a simple majority. I think that the power of a simple majority is undervalued. We're all here based on a simple majority vote. That's how we become legislators. And so I think that it is that principle in our democracy that's important to preserve. And I think this goes in the wrong direction. I think we should be moving towards simple majority on revenue, simple majority on budgets. I think it should be based on a simple majority. But what bothers me most about this is that the people of the state of California now have a right to petition our government and approve that petition by a simple majority. And this stifles their ability to do that. And so I just think to approve a measure that makes it more difficult for the people of the state of California to express their will is something I'm not prepared to support.
Okay. Tony Mendoza?
I understand Mr. Swanson's concern. I agree with you in a lot of ways. I understand the author's intent. I think it's a valued intent, and I will be supporting the measure. I'm hoping that you would consider, maybe as the bill moves along, they made changes to changing the vote threshold for like school bonds to like 55%. We're trying to lower down the opportunity to pass tax revenues that even at 60%, right? Instead of 2/3, just 60%. Maybe you might be amenable to, maybe instead of 2/3 requirement for this, to change the constitution, make it 60%. That's something we could work with. Maybe 55% like we do for school bonds. 2/3 have always been an issue for a lot of us, but just for the author to consider as the bill moves along, might be able to gather more support as we go through the process.
Sure, happy to consider that. One of the reasons why we kept it at 2/3 was the notion of parity. Right now, if the legislature wants to propose a constitutional amendment, we have to pass it by 2/3. So it makes sense, in my humble opinion, to say that any constitutional amendment has been vetted by 2/3 of the people of the state. It can be vetted by 2/3 of the state through the initiative process, or it can be vetted by 2/3 of the state through the elected representatives, which is us, and then ratified by a simple majority of the electorate. But I'm happy to consider it. I think it's good. We lose some of the parity argument, but I think it's a good proposal.
I guess my question is, maybe you could just, because we raised the issue of revenue increases and really trying to move towards empowering the simple majority on that side. Could you maybe distinguish what you're trying to get at with the constitutional amendment piece of this? Because I think we're talking now about two different things. So how do we not sound like we would be contradicting ourselves with it by supporting this measure, is my first question. If you could maybe explain that. And then I have maybe a follow-up.
Sure. So thank you very much for the question. I think you raised a very, very, very important concept that I can't stress enough, and I want to elaborate on it a little bit more. To raise a new revenue, to have a new revenue bill, that is a statute. That's a statute that has to pass by the legislature. Now, the rules that are imposed on us, which many of us do not like, are that the statute has to be passed by 2/3 of the legislature. This does not affect statute. This is the Constitution. This is the governing document of our state. So I do not favor making statutes 2/3. But the Constitution, I favor making 2/3. And this is why, and this is a very important point. And so I hope that everyone will take heart of this, and I've saved the best for last. Everybody around the table should hopefully be thinking about some reform that they really care about. Any reform that they want. It could be something like changing the 2/3 requirement. It could be something like any reform that you want to put in place. And you understand that if we keep the power to amend the Constitution at 50% plus one, every single reform in our state is stifled, because the very next ballot could have an initiative that says, by the way, that reform was great, but we're carved out of it. So Mr. Fewer and I just made a change on ballot box budgeting. We proposed something that would require any new measure to require a new funding source. Well, unless we pass this, the very next ballot could contain a measure that said, by the way, we're going to amend the Constitution to carve us out from that last thing, which was passed by the will of the people. It's too easy in this state. I mean, we can't say we're for direct democracy and that 49 states and the federal government have it wrong. The federal government has it right in terms of requiring a simple majority for statutes, but this is the Constitution. This is the governing document of us. This is what we live by. You saw how easy it was to put a hateful thing into the Constitution, in my humble opinion, a few years ago. I think that's too easy. I don't think that 50% plus one of the population should have the ability to do that.
Could I just ask a follow-up to you? You talked about parity between the actions of the legislature and the public, and I just in terms of the 2/3 requirement, and I'm not sure that that's a good comparison to make in terms of justifying the need for 2/3. I think when you're dealing in primarily a two-party system, here the 2/3 is trying to ensure that you have broader base support. And I don't know that that applies when you're just talking about 2/3 of the general electorate, because they're not identifying maybe as clearly with a party philosophy. So in other words, it might be almost a higher standard, and that's where this idea of maybe making it 60. It's a very high standard to ask just the general public to come up to the 2/3. Whereas when it's the legislature, it's deliberately designed to ensure some kind of bipartisan support. And that's not necessarily what you're getting when you say the public has to do 2/3. You're just setting the bar really, really high.
Okay, no, that's a good point, and it's definitely one that I'd happy to consider going forward.
Okay.
Yeah, and I thank you for that question. I'm sorry.
Assemblymember Logue, and then Assemblymember Hall.
Do you want to go ahead?
Well, please, go ahead.
Yeah, and I apologize for my question wasn't clear earlier. I think that was the point I was trying to make was that when the legislature votes, it has to be a 2/3 to put it on the ballot, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And right now, for the public, the proposition process, you want to move the qualification factor that if it gets on the ballot through proposition, it needs a 2/3 vote majority to be passed. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So that was where my problem is because the legislator needs 2/3 vote to put it on the ballot, but if they put it on the ballot, it's a simple majority to pass, right?
Correct.
Okay. And I think that's the issue. And I think this is going to be perceived as a legislative strong arm of the grassroots efforts in the state of California. And I'm looking at rules being played by different rules between the legislature and the grassroots people in the state of California. And right now, our polling numbers aren't real high. And I think if we go out of here and telling the public that, you know what, you're not happy with the way things are going, and by the way, we're going to tie your hands even more, I think that's going to personally send the wrong message. And I would like to ask you this one more question, is if you think the 2/3 majority is so important, why don't you have this put on the ballot yourself and see if the public would pass it with 2/3 vote?
Mr. Chair.
I'll just wait for an answer. Excuse me.
I guess the short answer is that I don't have $20 million. But the bigger answer is that the bigger answer is simply, look, I think our polling numbers are so low in this state because we are constantly not doing our job, and we're constantly not doing our job because the initiative process forces the people to do our job for us. I mean, guys, look, you cannot argue that the federal Constitution is a wise thing. Nobody on this panel would argue that the state Constitution has been used and abused by special interests. You have here a publication that, by all accounts, leans right, 16 pages, single space, Mr. Logue, saying that this is the most critical reform to the future of the state of California. Here you have a book, leans left, very far left, or quite openly left. And this book proposes that this reform and these other package of reforms that we've heard and we're going to hear later today, are critical to fixing the Golden State. There is so much frustration in this state because we keep asking the people to do the job that their legislature was intended to. You cannot say that 49 states have it wrong and that the federal government has it wrong and that we're going to defend this here in California. I mean, I think California clearly needs reforms. Thank you.
Member Hall.
Yes, thank you. I'm sharing with some of my colleagues here the same question. We've not had a chance to speak, and with all deference to my good friend, Mr. Gatto, would you be willing to, so that we can get this out of committee, be willing to consider 55%? And I say this because absent of that, I don't, and I'm not the chair, but I can count. I don't think it gets out of the committee, and so I'm just giving an olive branch here.
I appreciate the olive branch. I wouldn't be myself unless I negotiated back and say, do we hear 60? I mean,
some of the concerns I keep hearing here, if you start high, it's hard to bring it down. But if you start low at 55, say if it works or it doesn't work, then we could bring it up to 60 later on. But
see the concern is
too high.
Let me just share this concern with you. if we picked any of the measures that people, we might even, if we took a poll here, we might even get 7 people to identify, and we won't do it, but identify some of the measures that are junk in the Constitution. There's a lot, 541 amendments in 100 years. And you look back at some of those passed with 55% of the vote. I think that's just a little too low. In my humble opinion, I think 60% is fair. I think that's what, I think that's what I've heard from people. It does take away the parity argument. I'm kind of hesitant to do it at all, but like you said, I can count. So I.
I recommend. There's always, and this is my motion. I moved the bill. It's always an opportunity if we start at 55 to come back again. And
that's a good point. Okay, fine. I will accept that amendment if it pleases the chair.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a subsequent motion.
Okay. That amendment will have to be presented right before appropriations, which this bill will be going to approps next week.
Sure.
And so
absolutely.
That'll be after this approval will now be.
Okay, so I move the bill pursuant to that amendment with the 55%. But with the understanding that if that amendment is not forthcoming in appropriations, that the chair will bring the bill back.
Yeah, I don't do business that way. If I take the amendment, I'd do it. So yeah.
Okay. All right.
66. Well, 66.6. Yeah. So it would go down to 55.
55.
Yes.
Yep.
You like chaos.
That's pretty good. Bipartisan support, right?
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay.
You know what?
Okay, are there any other questions from members?
I just want to appreciate your active face.
Thank you.
Well, I actually believe that our founding fathers had it right. When they created our Constitution, that's one of the things that they did right. They made it very difficult to amend the Constitution. And they required 75%. And so 66% I was okay with, but 55% I'm okay with too. But as long as it's a little more difficult to amend the Constitution, because it's, I support Sandra Swanson's simple majority argument, but in a constitutional amendment where it's supposed to be difficult to amend, I think our founding fathers had it right when they created our Constitution and made it real difficult to amend. They only have 27 amendments to our federal Constitution, and we have 500 plus, in 160 years. It's just way out of control. And so I support it, and it's with the amendments that you'll take to the appropriations at 55%.
And that's with the understanding that if amendments, and just for the record, to make sure the members are comfortable, that if the amendments are not presented in appropriations, that the chair would bring the bill back.
Right. Okay. I'll bring it back if it's not presented appropriations. Okay. All right. I'll second that motion.
Very well.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded. Okay, Madam Secretary, please call roll.
Fong.
Aye.
Fong, aye. Logue.
I whispered it.
Logue, no. Bonilla.
Aye.
Bonilla, aye. Hall.
Hall, aye.
Hall, aye. Mendoza. Mendoza, aye. Swanson. Valadeo.
4-1. It's out.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations. As amended. Yeah.
Well,
Okay. ACA 19. Assemblymember Allen. Before we present on ACA 19, Allen, I have a clarification to make. Comment number 6 on page 5 of the analysis for ACA 19 indicates that a technical amendment is necessary to avoid an inconsistency in this measure. Upon subsequent conversations with the Legislative Council and additional review of this measure, however, committee staff is comfortable that the amendment is not necessary. In light of this fact, committee members and members of the public should disregard the suggested amendment in comment number 6 of the analysis. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. AC 19 is a good governance bill that will result in more precise and less confusing language being submitted to the voters, as well as to a larger degree of transparency through the initiative process. AC 19 is modeled after the indirect initiative process California had until 1966. Similar methods are currently used in 8 other states. This measure will allow but not mandate the proponent of an initiative to work with the legislature to amend their language after it has been qualified for the ballot. If the legislature is able to pass the measure and have it signed by the governor, it will become law and the proposition will be pulled from the ballot. I want to stress that the power over the proposition still remains in the hands of the proponent, and the legislature cannot force any changes. If the proponent and the legislature disagree on proposed changes, the original language goes on the ballot. If the legislature amends the language but is unable to pass the measure, the new language is placed on the ballot. Any amendments agreed to by the proponent are reviewed by the Attorney General to verify that it furthers the original intent of the measure. And all amendments must be reported to the Secretary of State within 131 days of the next scheduled election. So essentially, it provides for the ability of the legislature to work with the proponents so that when bills are crafted, they're well crafted, more easily understood, and less likely to have unintended consequences.
Move the bill.
Go ahead and finish the presentation.
No, that was it.
Okay. Witnesses in support.
After Mr. Gatto, I know it seems very short, but that's it.
Witnesses in support. Witnesses in opposition.
Mr. Chairman, members, David Wolf here with the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. We're opposed to ACA 19 as well. We just believe that ACA 19 would eliminate what has been largely 30 years of precedent-setting cases regarding the people's ability to amend previously approved statutory amendments. In 2010, the California Supreme Court decided a decision, People v. Kelly, regarding Proposition 215, which was a measure dealing with medical marijuana plants, specifically regarding the quantity of plants that an individual could have in their possession. And the Supreme Court ruled that Legislative Counsel, first of all, attempted to assert in that case that it was furthering the purpose of the initiative to determine the quality or the quantity of marijuana plants. And the California Supreme Court came back in that case and said quantity and other aspects of that case did not, in fact, further the purpose of the initiative. My concern, members, and the reason I bring that up is this. We do believe via this measure that it would be possible to increase taxes on a majority vote. Let me give you a hypothetical to this point. Let's say various special interests go out and qualify a statutory measure to add an additional income tax bracket to our current 8-level income tax bracket system. The measure says that can be amended, that statutory measure can be amended within 6 years. Let's say proponents come back after that additional income tax bracket has been added. Let's say they come back at that point and decide they want to increase income taxes. And let's assume that Kamala Harris, the Attorney General, decides that that furthers the purpose of that initiative to increase the income tax brackets. It would then be possible under ACA 19 to pass this measure on a majority vote of the legislature without a vote of the people, and thus amending Article 2, Section 10 of the Constitution. So we do believe this can be perverted and manipulated and used as a way to raise taxes. That's, I think, a pretty decent hypothetical that is certainly possible, and for those reasons, we'd ask for a no vote.
Okay. All right. Witnesses in opposition? No more? Members, Tony Mendoza, question?
Yeah. Let me say, I have nothing but respect for Mr. Allen and this initiative, and I guess what I'm having problems with this measure and the previous measure is, the right of the people to have the ability to petition the government have that petition certified and vote on it. I mean, I think it's almost a separation of powers question for me on one level. Second, this would require a 2/3 vote of each house. I'm right about that, right? 2/3 vote of each house once this petition comes to the House for it to go forward. And this House has just not demonstrated its ability to reasonably consider things with 2/3 majority of the House. And so I certainly wouldn't want people to go through the problem of having an initiative, it come to this process, and then it gets bogged down because of our inability to reach 2/3 agreement. So that's kind of the issue for me. But and I don't know how that gets fixed. But I'm just basically trying to be more or less a traditionalist around this question of the people having the right to petition.
Well, I agree with you. That's why it's drafted in such a way as that the power of it going forward with the legislature remains in the hands of the proponents. And if the proponents don't want to go that direction, they don't have to.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah,
it's optional. Okay, Tony Mendoza.
This measure is, I truly believe, is a really good measure. I think sometimes we get initiatives that are really not vetted through. We end up, with something that we don't like, stuck in courts, blah, blah, blah. We never have a say in it. We never fix them as a legislature to make sure it's going to serve the public, whichever the intent of the makers of the certain initiative, what their intent is. I think hearing the concern of some of my colleagues here, and keep going back to the same 2/3 requirement. Is there any way that we can talk about that as a means of maybe possibly passing our each house at a lower threshold than 2/3?
We're open to this because really this envisions a partnership between the proponents and the legislature.
Right.
So it's not meant to be a way of creating hurdles for the electorate.
I appreciate that because I think that the intent of this bill is basically to clean up these initiatives that are being drafted out there, and we never have a say into it until it's already passed.
Exactly.
Right? So it really, and I remember this bill. I remember I remember the ideals behind this, and it's long overdue. And I commend the author on doing this bill because I hope it does pass because we really need to make sure that these initiatives that come before us are vetted through the legislature and is cleaned up before they actually are passed and voted on and so forth. So I'm with the intent of their bill. If we could change the threshold to a lower amount, I know the previous version of the previous bill, we kind of put it at 55%. That's still a high threshold for even our own houses. Both houses, are you amenable to that?
I'm not hung up at all on the percentage.
Oh, okay.
I see 55 is fine because I just see this as a cooperative effort.
Got it. I appreciate that. And Mr. Chair, I make a motion that we approve to pass this bill with the 55% to be added on when it goes to approbes as an amendment.
I just want to clarify the constitutional amendment currently, if the legislature is acting on an initiative measure, it would be the legislature's action would be subject to whatever vote would otherwise be required for the measure it's considering. So in the case of a constitutional amendment, a 2/3 vote. In the case of a statute, it would be a majority vote unless there were some element of the statute that required a supermajority vote. That's what it currently is. So I just want to be clear on what the amendment is.
So it's really, sorry, Matt.
Go ahead.
So it's really essentially allowing current law to apply.
Exactly.
If the measure comes forward.
Correct.
It could be changed with the previous bill as well.
And that's what the author is saying. Right. He wants to clarify as a bill goes forward. That it be if it's
statutory and it's at the lower threshold, and we go there. If it's for constitutional, it goes there. I was really more focusing on the cooperative effort and trying to get bad language cleaned up with the legislature in cooperation, and in deference to the testimony given by the Prop 13 folks. There was a lot of hypotheticals, but really it's not designed to frustrate the will of the people. It's really meant to effectuate the will of the people and using the legislature when they want to use the legislature.
Right. Yeah, it's optional.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and I have a lot of respect for the author, and I've expressed my concerns. I am prepared to, as courtesy to the author, move the bill forward, give you a chance to work on it more. I trust the author's
moved by
intent.
Dr. Swanson, second by Tony Mendoza. Okay, any other questions from members? Okay, surveys have shown that California voters want initiative proponents. And
I think it was moved by Mr. Hall and seconded by Mr. Mendoza.
okay, moved by Mr. Hall, and seconded by Mr. Mendoza. Okay. The California voters want initiative proponents and legislature to work together whenever possible to solve the state's problems, so thank you for addressing this issue. Initiatives sometimes have technical or logistic problems that cannot be fixed once petitions are in circulation. Under this measure, the legislator would be able to review initiatives and propose changes to address any problems, and it's subject to the proponent's wishes too. And it's optional in a sense, and it's a great optional alternative. And so I'm going to support this bill. I'm supporting this measure.
So in closing, I urge an aye vote. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Madam Secretary, please call roll.
Fong,
Aye.
Fong, aye. Logue, no. Bonilla, Bonilla, aye. Hall, Hall, aye. Mendoza, Mendoza, aye. Swanson,
Aye.
Swanson, aye. Valadeo, no.
5-2. It's out.
Thank you.
Thank you. Congratulations. No other business, we can adjourn. Okay. If no other business, this meeting is adjourned.